Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos ao podcast Tic-Tac-Gol. Eu sou a Erika e eu tô aqui rapidinho só pra dar um recadinho pra vocês antes de começar esse episódio mais do que especial. Hoje a gente traz então uma entrevista incrível com a Erika Ayala. Ela é uma jornalista freelancer e foi a primeira e ainda é a única comentarista negra e latina da PHF. Ela também é a fundadora da Black Rose Media, que é um projeto que busca amplificar a voz de mulheres negras e não brancas, produtoras de conteúdo sobre esporte. Ela cobriu os 2 torneios de hóquei no gelo das Olimpíadas de Pequim. Ela apresenta um podcast sobre o Seattle Kraken, chamado Locked On Kraken. Ela também fez parte da primeira transmissão 100% feminina na NHL, pela estação de rádio do New Jersey Devils. Então, ela é maravilhosa. Vocês vão ver. Foi 1h20 de conversa, mas vocês ouvintes do TTG já estão acostumados com episódios longos, né? A conversa foi toda em inglês, porque a Erika, ela é americana, né? Mas não se preocupe caso você não seja fluente, não entenda muito bem inglês. O vídeo da entrevista está postado lá no nosso YouTube da NHL Brasil, que só procurando NHL Brasil no YouTube vocês encontram. E tá todo legendado. Foi um trabalhão, mas tá todo legendado. A 1h20 de conversa está legendada no YouTube. E além disso também vai estar disponível no nosso site na íntegra para quem quiser ler a entrevista. Então eu deixo vocês aqui para aproveitar essa conversa maravilhosa que a gente teve com a Erika. Aqui na descrição do streaming de podcast que você está usando vai ter todos os links das redes sociais dela. Sigam ela, é um trabalho maravilhoso que ela faz. Sigam também todas as redes sociais da NHL Brasil, como já é de praxe a gente falar aqui, né? Acho que eu não preciso lembrar vocês todas as redes, mas é só procurar NHL Brasil em qualquer rede social que vocês vão nos achar. E por fim, como a vinheta a seguir vai falar pra vocês, o TTG é um podcast da NHL Brasil em parceria com o Fambonanet, que é o maior portal de podcast sobre esportes americanos no Brasil. A gente agora, semana que vem, deve voltar pra falar tudo sobre playoffs da NHL, mas por enquanto fiquem com essa entrevista maravilhosa, essa conversa longa de 1h20 com a pessoa maravilhosa que é a Erika Ayala.
Esse podcast faz parte do site Fambonanet. Acesse fambonanet.com.br.
Hello everyone, welcome to another video here on our YouTube channel, and if you're hearing us on our podcast, welcome. We're here today with a very special guest. Erika, welcome to Tic-Tac-Gol, and we're so excited to have you. We haven't introduced ourselves. I'm so sorry. I'm Louisa, and girls take over.
I'm also Erika. We share the same name. My name is Erika.
Vai, Nath.
And Natalia, hello.
Hello.
And I'm Ana.
Okay, perfect. So Erika is a really special guest for us because she does all this work in the hockey community. She's a broadcaster. She is a hockey analyst. She covers the PHF, a little bit of the NHL too. So you went to the Frozen Four. We're so excited to talk about that too. It's so exciting. So yeah, girls, do you want to start with the questions?
First of all, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work for those who don't know about you?
Sure. So again, my name is Erika Ayala. I am originally from New York, but I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is somewhere in the middle of the United States. I am relatively new to hockey. I didn't grow up watching hockey. I never played ice hockey, but I was always into sports. And my younger sister, Jessica, she got really into hockey during the 2014 Olympics, watching mostly the United States men's and women's teams. But she realized that Julie Chu was on the team, and, we are Black Latina. And so we're always looking for, as I like to say, melanated people or people of color in the hockey space. And Julie Chu was her first, hockey star. And that's what got me into hockey. We would go to, at the time, there were the New York Riveters. They played in New York City and Brooklyn. And we went as a family. And so I started just as a fan. And I'm sure you all know how it goes, especially for something that's new or not really as accessible as other things where you're from. I loved the experience. It was probably my first real hockey game. And I loved the experience so much. I wanted to learn more about it, but there weren't a lot of people talking about the league, talking about the Riveters. So the people that were, I would reach out to them and I would say, hey, I just love what you're doing. I think it's great. I want to learn more. And some of those people would say, all right, well, hey, come on our podcast. Or, by the end of that first season, it's the PHF now, but it was the National Women's Hockey League. One of the outlets was like, listen, 2 of the semifinals are at the same time. We can't go to both. Would you cover one for us? And I was like,
wow.
Folks, I know, right? I was like, okay, like, happy to do it, but I don't know anything about hockey, right? They're like, no, it's fine. You're just so passionate. And so, as I say, the rest is history. And I've had a lot of really cool opportunities, but I like to say it's because my mom raised her 3 daughters, to always be curious and to ask questions. So in this case, it led to a whole new profession for me. And now I'm a full-time freelancer. As you mentioned at the top, I am a broadcaster. That's another thing where someone was like, hey, you should do this. And I was like, okay, let's do it. But this year I got the chance to call a NHL game, which was really exciting. For International Women's Day, the New Jersey Devils had myself and Kelly Schultz. She's another broadcaster with the Premier Hockey Federation. We've worked together for a number of years, and we called the game from start to finish. And that was really exciting. And as far as I know, I'm the first and only Black Latina to call an NHL game. It was on the Devils radio, but that was a pretty cool experience. And so, yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
That's perfect. And getting to the New Jersey Devils game, how was that experience for you? Like, how did you get there, and how was that connection with the team? And tell us, like, we would love to know. That is like, it's so great, cool.
It was really cool. And it's a great question because I come from the women's hockey side. I mean, like I said, Julie Chu is the first superstar that my family knew of through my sister, Jessie. And, I'm very familiar with the women's game, still learning the men's game. And still learning hockey. So on the one hand, I knew it was such a big deal to a lot of other people, but for me, it was like, oh, like, this is cool. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of a big deal. And we found out pretty late. So I actually got to also cover my first Olympics. So I was in Beijing, China, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get home safely, right? There was still a lot of COVID going around. And then I was like, I'm just going to take it easy and rest. And then the Devils called and they're like, hey, do you want to call a game? And I was like, you bet. Yeah, so I didn't get as much rest on the back end of coming back from Beijing as I thought. But I mean, it's an opportunity you just have to take. And I kind of told you that's been my story. Even if I don't think I'm ready, if someone says, hey, you should do this, I'm like, okay, let's go. And so I feel that I probably would have been more nervous had it not been for me knowing the Riveters team. And why do I say that? Because for a number of years, the Riveters played at the practice facility. And actually they did again this past, played at the practice facility of the New Jersey Devils. And I would be at practices a lot just because I have to see a lot of hockey because I'm so new to it. So I try to go to as much hockey practices, games, things like that, so that I can get a feel for the game in my own words. And, but because of that, I ran into a lot of Riveters fans that would invite me to Devils games if they had an extra ticket or something like that. So of all of the teams, other than the Seattle Kraken, where I host a show about the Seattle Kraken now, as part of, I'm wearing my little polo today for the Locked On Kraken network. But other than the Seattle Kraken, the Devils are probably the team that I know the best. I know their fan base. I know what it's like to be at a game at Prudential Center, which is their home arena, or the Rock as it's known. So I felt that all of the elements that I bring to a broadcast, which is the energy, the fun, the storytelling, and being able to connect with the fan base, I knew all of that because of, again, women's hockey. So I think that took a lot of nerves away. Also, I mentioned Kelly Schultz. She and I had worked together. When I first got the call, I was thinking they were just going to add me to the broadcast that they usually have. But I was really excited to learn that I would get to work with a play-by-play and be the analyst to Kelly Schultz, who's someone that I already have a rapport with. We've worked together before. So I think I really got lucky. Again, the timing wasn't exactly what I had in mind. And it was a pretty quick turnaround from when we found out to getting all of the logistics. Cause again, I'm originally from New York, but I'm not in New York all the time. So I had to get out to New Jersey, but the Devils were really great. And, they flew us out there to call the game, and we got to go to morning skate just like I would if I were covering the Seattle Kraken, or just like in women's hockey, they don't really do morning skate, but if I had gone to the practice before the game. So once I got to the rink, I was like, oh, it's just hockey. So it's fine.
Having my game here, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Once all the fans start coming in, it gets very familiar, and I'm very grateful that I had that experience.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have like someone to look up to, because we know that hockey is like extremely white. So I think I'm a white person, but I can only imagine how it feels like to look up and see yourself on the TV, and having you as a Latina as well. We're all Latinas here. So it was so nice. And I didn't get to watch that game, but when I saw it, I was like freaking out because I was so happy for you and for, yeah. So it was really nice. It was really cool.
Yeah. It was exciting. It was. And thank you so much for that. Because like you said, it's a pretty white sport. And I think a lot of people see and know that I identify as Black, but being Latina, not a lot of, and I've talked about this before, but not a lot of people necessarily pick up on that part of my experience and my culture and just who I am as well. So it's nice to speak to other Latinos, or as I like to use, I say Latine, because, I feel it's a little bit, yes, okay, bueno. So, okay, so yes, I like to say Latine. That's just my preference anyway, but it's nice to speak to familia.
Yeah, super nice. I think you're the first one that we've had here that is like from the outside, because we have a lot of friends, of course, that come in the channel, that come in the podcast, but we've interviewed players, and we've interviewed Emma Gill. She used to work for Hockey Night in Canada. Yes. So it was super nice. And we're so happy to have you here again. Yeah. Saying that again, because
saying all the time, because it's an honor. It's something magical. Yeah. And as you said, like being Latina and being so close to hockey, that's amazing. I think that's like all of our dreams, and it's really important.
Oh wow, well thank you so much for that. And it can be tough here. I can't speak to where it is other places, but even in the United States, culturally everyone has differences of opinions. And my family is from Puerto Rico y Cuba, my grandparents, but my parents, we didn't grow up speaking Spanish. And so I think sometimes that disconnect culturally comes because I sometimes when I speak Spanish, it sounds a little funny, or it's broken. It's very, very Spanglish at best. So I mean, and that can be tough too, which is a whole nother conversation, just being even in my culture, my US culture, but then to add that to the US culture or the North American culture of, again, hockey being pretty white or, pretty one tone as far as how we perceive it. But what has been cool as I've been learning more about hockey is learning, from broadcasting to players on the ice to even people as owners, it is much more colorful of a game than the collective we of like the hockey community let on, which is why I was so excited to join your show. And I've seen just in passing some of the work that you have done, again, because I'm pretty new, especially on the men's side of hockey. But I think it's really exciting. And I love that y'all are here talking about hockey and, letting people know that whether it's not just being from North America or, speaking different languages and being from different cultures, that hockey truly has embraced a lot of people. There's so many people that are in the hockey loving community. And I'm looking forward to the day when we really don't take for granted, or I should say, don't just assume or accept the assumption that hockey is only or is even a majority white, because as I think about it, I'm not even sure, that narrative is as accurate as we sometimes portray it to be, right? So I look forward to us really embracing all that is hockey.
I think that we see the players on the ice and we think of it as like the sport, but it's so much bigger, right? There are fans, there are journalists, there are so many people involved in hockey. And yeah, I think you're right. It's not as white anymore. We see it like the way it is portrayed because of the players and the general managers and all of that. It's a lot of white still, but the community is part of hockey too. So thank you for the highlight, because I never thought of that. Like, I think I kind of separated it from the ice, in ice and off ice. So it's important to have that perspective too. Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to honor you, because it's natural. It's a sport. So when we're talking about a sport, ultimately at some point, you're going to talk about what's happening on the ice, but there's so much that it takes to even get on the ice. And again, just how I ended up even getting in hockey wasn't in talking to players or even coaches. It was talking to the people who were talking about the players and about the coaches. And I think that's what's been beautiful. And I think I consider myself very blessed and very lucky, which is why anytime anyone asks me how I got into hockey, I always mention my sister, because without that, I wouldn't have, I might not have ever gotten into hockey, or I would have just assumed that the way you get into hockey is through this very specific way. But I got to, see hockey through my sister's eyes, or through women's hockey's eyes, or now I do a lot of work with the Black Girl Hockey Club and how they embrace hockey, or, being able to cover one of the first transgender players in women's hockey in Harrison Brown. And so there's just so many different ways that, again, hockey can kind of find fans in quote unquote non-traditional places.
You said about the Black Girl Hockey Club, and we have a question that is, what made you create the hashtag Black Rosie Media?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. And so it goes back to women's hockey. The original story is that as a media member, the NWHL at the time was very much considering doing a version of a Black Rosie the Riveter. So the Metropolitan Riveters now, their logo is the iconic US symbol known as Rosie the Riveter. It's a white woman. She's like flexing. She's got the bandana in her hair, and it comes from World War II. And so the Riveters were thinking of having a Black Rosie. And I loved the idea. I was one of the people that got to see an early mock-up. I really don't know what happened. For one reason or another, the league and the Riveters ultimately didn't use that. But I liked the idea so much. And so my Black Rosie design was created by Jordan Dabney, who this year the Riveters actually did have a Black Rosie, and it was Jordan who designed that one as well. But my Black Rosie, she's flexing her arm, but she holds a microphone. And I thought that would be a really cool way to create something that was definitely inspired by women's hockey, but that it was something that I could take and have as my own. Because what I have learned, especially now that I've been a freelancer full-time, is everything that we just said about hockey is very true when you are a woman in hockey, when you are a Black woman in hockey, when you are Latina in hockey, all of those things. And so these layers of who I am, just who I am every day, on a Friday, who I am, for some people don't represent hockey, or they don't even represent hockey media or sports media. So I loved the symbol of the flexing of the arm, that powerful pose that Rosie has, and to give her a microphone, not just to represent media members, but also to represent women, but especially women of color, as I like to say, melanated women, Latinas, Asian women, for us to use our voice and to speak. And so since creating that with Jordan Dabney, I've kind of created that as a brand, and I have some really exciting activations that I have for Black Rosie. And the idea is to uplift and empower mostly Black women, or similarly to Black Girl Hockey Club, the focus, the first and primary focus is Black women. And of course, because I am Latina, Black and Latina women, but also melanated creators, to expand that. I don't want to be limiting in any way. And to make sure that those creators, those media people, are able to have the opportunity to be in front of the microphone and have their work that they create celebrated just like everyone else. So that's a little bit about Black Rosie.
That's so nice. Love it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So the phrase reimagining sports coverage is highlighted in your YouTube and your website. What would be the perfect way, especially by mainstream media, to cover sports for you?
Yeah, that's another great question. And thank you. So this idea of reimagining, in the United States, we have a statistic that we use a lot, that 4%, give or take, of media coverage covers women in sports. That's not just athletes, that's any woman that is related to sports. And that seems like a pretty low percentage, because there's a lot of sports media and sports entertainment coverage. And so reimagining that it kind of goes to the other question, right? About having Black Rosie and her symbol, to place those creators at the forefront. I think women's basketball is a really great example. You're seeing women's basketball really take an opportunity. And I should say that the Black Rosie conversation with the league was happening around the time of George Floyd, and unfortunately more deaths at the hands of law enforcement here in the United States. So women's basketball and women's basketball players have always been very vocal when it comes to those issues that we have here in the United States. And it's always been a space where those conversations can exist. And so I think that's why we see in women's basketball, even though it's taken a really long time, that a lot of the progress happens in that space. And isn't that interesting, right? That it usually happens with women's basketball, which essentially is a lot of Black women. But I think that hockey, because of everything that we've talked about before, we might not see it on the ice, but we know as hockey loving people that there are people that speak our language, that share our religion, that share all of our other qualifiers and identifiers. And we know that they exist in the hockey space. And we know that culturally there are pockets of hockey culture and subcultures of hockey that are booming and ready to embrace that. And we inspire what we sometimes see when it comes to what the NHL tries to do or what they are doing now. And so I think it would be great if, instead of what I would say as maybe like co-opting or taking what creators are doing in those pockets, what I would love to see mainstream media, to the question, is hire those creators. And similarly to how we see, Hockey Night in Canada, or, and Hockey Night in Canada extending to different languages. I think that can happen too. And it's not something that, in this case, the NHL or international hockey needs to then, go figure out who on their staff, speaks Portuguese or Spanish. They should instead go to communities that already love hockey and are already following hockey and hire those people and give them the opportunity to do what they already do, but to do it through a larger network.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would be awesome.
It's very annoying because they're always like, they giving credits, but they don't hire those people. And like, you could hire because they have the talent, they have everything, but they just don't do that. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, it is. And it's quite honestly, it's a little tired, right? It's a little corny. Because, if you are going to hire me to be on the New Jersey Devils broadcast, I'm not going to sound like Doc Emmerich or any of these white guys because I literally don't know what it's like to be that. That being said, I know I can bring who I am and bring myself. And I found my way to hockey. And so that means that there are people that introduced me to hockey, and there are people that have experienced me in the hockey space. And they're going to be trolls, who want to do all of the foolishness. But that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I think hockey is in a position similarly to baseball, which is another sport I absolutely love, but they're finding themselves on the wrong side of the 8 ball of innovation. And they keep thinking that having white faces do what we do is the way to change it. And it's not. It's to bring up the people who are doing the innovative things and allow them to do it with more resources. I mean, what would y'all do if you had the NHL supporting this? Exactly. It just would be, because a lot of us, we do this on our own time, on our own dime. And we do it because we have passion and we love it, and we get a following, and we connect with people in the hockey space in ways that they've never been. I can't tell you how many times I've only been a journalist for 7 years. And, I still today have people say, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. I'm like, well, why the heck not? You are amazing. You have amazing fashion. Why wouldn't I ask you about your game day fit? And now what do we see? Everyone's doing that, So yeah, I think it's critically important that, and some of this might also exist in the hockey space, but because we see people as kind of monotone, we don't allow, I don't want to say allow, because that it implies that someone up above has to give us permission to be ourselves. That's not how I feel. We don't encourage or empower people to bring their full selves to the space. And I think when we do that, the opportunities are endless. And I think hockey is an amazing sport. It's so fast. There's technical, there's physical, there's speed. That makes for such an exciting game. And now, the way we consume entertainment, it needs a little flavor. All right. And I'm just saying, we know who can bring the flavor.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's every time that I see like new people being hired on broadcast, and it's like the same people, and like someone leaves, I don't know, New York and goes to LA and he gets hired there, and it's the same voices, it's the same questions, it's the same ignorance, because there are so many ignorant people in the hockey media, and that drives me crazy, because there's so many important things and interesting things that you can ask the players. Like, players are usually treated like just players, but they're people, so there's interesting stuff that you can ask them, and you don't, because you just go in that loop. So yeah,
exactly. Or even like as a Latina, it took me years to realize that Austin Matthews spoke Spanish.
Yeah.
I was like, what? How is this not a thing. Or, you know, there was this clip going around, I guess it was right before the All-Star game. And, you know, he was talking about how excited he was to go home and, or be home and have his mother's cooking, which is, you know, authentic Mexican food. And, you know, someone said, I forget the term because it's not something that I would ever use, but, you know, essentially saying that he was going to be gassy. And it's like, okay, homie, like, don't like call yourself out. Okay. Because if I eat rice and beans on a regular, I'll be fine. You know, but it's just like those little things are like those microaggressions. And, you know, Austin was like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah,
you know, like that's you. Yeah. Don't put that on me. But, you know, and just even little things like that where, you know, and, you know, I think the guy genuinely thought he was being funny, but, you know, if we were to say, this is, I don't know, this is such a weird example, but it's true. Like, you know, like when it comes to drinks, some people are like, oh, tequila, I can't do tequila. I'm like, girl, I'll be just fine. Now, if I can't mess with whiskey. I cannot mess with whiskey. That's when I get a little, you know, but for some people, that's the effect that tequila has. And I just feel like my gut was made for tequila, right? That's very familiar to my people. So just that as an example, but, you know, we have to be open and embracing that. Or even when I was in China, I came back for an event. You asked me about the men's Frozen Four, but we were at the men's Frozen Four and there was a buffet. And I guess the second round, they put out dumplings. And so I put some dumplings on my plate and someone was like, oh, well, guess we're back in Beijing now. And I was like, I mean, like, was that necessary? I mean, dumplings have always been a thing here, number one. And number two, like, what? I don't understand. You know, it's just like those little things where people think they're being cute or funny. And it's like, we don't have to do that. You know, it's not necessary. It's just not necessary.
Yeah. And
there's a big joke in social media, especially that hockey players don't have any personality, right? And I never thought about in this way that maybe it's not the players, maybe the issue is with mainstream media, that it's always the same questions, always the same subject. So I never thought about it this way.
Yes.
Because there's no option, like you have to answer this and just this.
Yeah. And that's another thing that is wild. I have started noticing a little bit when I'm in different spaces, because I don't just cover hockey. I cover soccer or football and basketball. And I do notice that there's a difference in how sometimes it seems like it's the age or sometimes it's the sport, but there are different ways that people in journalism ask questions. And the questions that kind of, to use a Southern term, really burn my grits are the questions where it's like, oh, so, you know, the reason that you weren't able to get shots on net is because, you know, you were pinching in the zone or you weren't pinching in the zone, right? And it's like, okay, it's not a question. Like, you're asking someone to affirm your thought or whatever is the case. Like, you know, and to your point, like, yeah, like the questions sometimes are not great and they definitely don't nuance. I mean, it's one thing if you have a specific thing to ask, but I would love to see journalism open up to just, you know, you have your idea, you have the story in your head, but you ask a question in a way where the athlete can respond and be open and honest. But it's like, you know, or at the Olympics, it was like, you know, Hillary Knight did this. I mean, how amazing is it to be on a line with Hillary Knight? And it's like, how do you answer that other than, oh yeah, it is really amazing? I mean, that's probably the answer anyway, but also like give that person an opportunity maybe to share a story about how amazing Hillary Knight is. And maybe something that we don't see about Hillary Knight that makes Hillary Knight such an effective hockey player. But when you're like, what I said is right. Yeah, you don't give the player an opportunity to ask. So one way that I try to do that, including I try not to assume how players identify. One thing that I like to do is to ask players if they know the story about how they got their name, their first name, or if they know if their last name has any special meaning. And I know, especially, in Latin culture, names are very important, and they hold a lot of history. And, the jokes go around that, we have so many names, but the reason that we carry those names is because it's the lineage, it's the connection to our ancestors. And that's, people are easy to make a joke about it, but that's more often than not why a lot of us have multiple names. And it also relates to religion in a lot of ways as well. So I find that as a fun way to get players to open up. It's just to ask them about their name. Like Blake Alexis Bolden, her middle name is her grandmother's name. And she told me that her mom thought about naming her daughter and wanted to give her a name that would be androgynous, as far as, am I going to meet Blake a man, Blake a woman, Blake a boy, Blake a girl? And on the one hand, you hear that a lot, but also isn't that like a little bit heartbreaking, to protect your Black daughter, and that you give her a name where she won't immediately be identified as a Black girl. So anyway.
No, that's very interesting, because when I first started liking hockey, I was like, oh my God, there's a Tavares in John Tavares. I was like, oh my God, is he Brazilian descent? And like, there's nothing, like, I know he is of Portuguese descent. I know that Canada has a lot of Portuguese immigrants, but there's nothing like about his family. There's nothing about, and I'm like, oh my God, so for say, like, I wanted to know why, because I think he has like, it comes from his grandpa or something like that. So it's special, but there's nothing about it.
I know, yeah, even things like that. I hadn't even thought about that, but at least here in North America, if you were to ask someone if they have a very German sounding name, they more often than not know that they have that lineage. But there's certain countries, and mostly countries where there are people of color, where that connection gets lost, and it's really sad. But I mean, that's another way. When I was talking to Blake, who now works with the LA Kings, I was like, Blake, the only thing I know about the LA Kings is you and Martinez. I know he scored a goal to help win a Stanley Cup.
That's all.
That's it. That's all I got.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just such a simple example. Look at us. We're lighting up talking about last names, surnames. And that's such an easy way. And again, that's why it's a way that's familiar to me to hopefully have those conversations with athletes, because you really learn a lot. And again, culturally, it's just such an important thing from my culture. And it's a way that obviously has resonated with you all. So it's just another example of ways that we can just ask. It's a very simple way to just ask a question a little bit differently, or introduce yourself, or have someone introduce themselves a little bit differently. That might open up a whole conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you already started talking about this, but how do you feel being a Black and Latina woman in an industry that is dominated by white cisgender men? You already talked about it, but I think it's really important to keep having that talk.
Yes, it's very important. And, I know that some people will say, oh, I'm not Black. I'm not a Black hockey player. I'm just a hockey player. And, I try, there was a younger version of me that would be like, no, but you're Black, or, whatever. But there's a realness to that, of just wanting to kind of fit into the culture. But the problem is that everywhere I go, whether I go, if I love baseball too, and if I go to a baseball game in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like I plan to later, I'm still a Black Latina walking into that stadium. I know that. And there are some people that will make it clear that they identify that as well. So, I mean, it's critically important to me. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, just the way I was raised and culturally, where I sit, especially with the language, when it comes to being Latina, I think it's always been easier for people to notice my Blackness But also we talk about, you mentioned Tavares. I mean, Ayala is, I mean, sometimes people think that I'm from the Philippines or Eritrean. It's a very strong last name. But I've realized that me speaking about who I am fully as a New Yorker, as a woman, as a Black woman, as a Black Latina, it's similarly to what we were just talking about. It opens other people up to talk about how they see the sport. And that's why, for me, it's so important. So I understand why people might want to say, oh, I'm not a Black Latina broadcaster. I'm just a broadcaster. But for me, that's not my whole story. Just like I am Black, but that's not my whole story. And I am Latina, but that's not my whole story. I'm a New Yorker, but that's not my whole story. And so for me, it's critically important to identify who I am, because I've found that, again, going back to some of the words that I always try to use, I have found that it empowers not only myself, and it honors who I am and where I come from, but it also empowers other people to do the same. And that's, for me, a part of the long game to getting hockey to not try to change, but more so for hockey to identify who it already is, because we're already here.
Yeah.
I think in a perfect world, we wouldn't need to say like, I am a woman journalist. Like here in Tic-Tac-Gol, we like to say that this is the first all-women podcast about hockey in Brazil. Like it's not, we at first we didn't talk like that about the podcast, but now it's important, because here in Brazil we have a big women fan base. Like there are a lot of girls that love hockey here, and they like to see that representation, So in a perfect world, I think we wouldn't need to talk like that, but unfortunately we live in this world, and it's important, I think, to bring this conversation, right?
Yeah. And before we started, before you arrived, we were having this conversation about identifying as Latina, because sometimes we Brazilians, we kind of don't feel like we are, because we're a little separated from the Spanish talking countries. And I was like, it is so important for me, because I can pass as non-Latina. I know that. But the moment that I tell people that I'm from Brazil, it's the treatment like switches a little bit, because I start, for a lot of people, I'm Latina now. So it's so important for me to just like put it out there. Like, I'm Latina. I am a Brazilian worker. I work with journalism. I write for a English-based website, but I'm here and I'm Brazilian. And on Twitter, like a lot of my followers don't know where I'm from. They think that I'm American. They think I'm from the United States, and I'm like, nope, I'm not there. So it's so important for me to identify, because it's easy to just look at me and see like, you're a white woman, so you're just in another category. No, I am a white woman, but I'm also Latina, so it's a little bit different. So yeah, so important to like have those. It's kind of labels, but it's a label that is important, because we're a representation. We're here representing other Latina girls that might want to be where we are. So it's so important.
Absolutely. I think there's so much in what you said there. And I love that you are creating that space. And, because if you just say you're a hockey podcast, who's going to go to that? If you think about things like SEO and, stuff like that, you're going to get people that we traditionally think of in hockey. But if you say you're a women's hockey podcast, you're going to get women or people who want to hear women speaking about hockey. And then if you add, the only women's hockey podcast in Brazil, that brings just a whole different, it's kind of like that song, bring them out, because it's like, oh, it's like, these are my people, these are my people. So I think that's why it's so important. And it's unfortunately still a hard thing. And we're only talking about the ways that we identify, not even in ways that some people that are in this space too also identify. And, that unfortunately, depending on where we are, is even more dangerous. I'm thinking about not being too far from Texas. And if you say you're a transgender, hockey fan in Texas, some people might take issue with that. And there are now laws that will give them the audacity to, maybe even be violent on that, which is just unfortunate. But that being said, I don't ever think that hiding who you are or being felt that or made to feel like the right thing to do is to suppress who you are is ever the right choice. It doesn't mean it's going to be the easy choice. But in the long term, I think we do more harm than good when we ourselves are not our full selves. And certainly we do harm to others when we don't fully accept and embrace that even being Latina, and this is something that I've had to learn over time, because for me, being Latina is directly related to being Black, but not every Latina is Black, as an example. And sometimes I have to check myself even as an adult, but that's because of our perspective. And it's one thing to just be like, oh, okay, right. We grew up differently or we identify differently, but it's another thing to be like, nope, the only way to be Latina is if you're Black, and I don't want to hear it. That's silly. It's silly.
Can I ask a question, right? You said that you got into hockey because of your sister. Because she got into hockey because of the Olympics. And how was it for you to go to Beijing to cover the hockey tournament there?
Oh man, well, okay, so it's been a few months. I will say it was really overwhelming. I feel like it would have been, I feel like it would have been overwhelming anyway. I mean, I'd been out of the country before, but I'd never been to that part of the world. I'd never been to China before. But then you throw in that there was a lot of uncertainty with where COVID was during that time. And I was also credentialed and accredited to cover the Tokyo Olympics, which then got pushed back a year. And I even when they pushed it back, I was like, I'm not ready to be around all those people with COVID, or with COVID being around. I was like, I'm not trying to say all of them had COVID, but you know what I'm saying, with COVID still being prevalent. And I had to make a choice when it came to China. And I just think where I'm at in my career and how attached I am to the hockey community, I really wanted to give it a try. But that was really, I was so anxious before I went. And then there was so much, it's such a long story. I was supposed to travel out of New York, which again is where my family is from. My flight got changed last minute, so I had to fly on the other side of from the other side of the United States in Los Angeles, and I found out with like 10 days left before I was supposed to leave. So I had to change plans and do all of these things, and then I had to get all my testing done, and the last test I had to take within essentially like 48, but closer to 24 hours. And so 2 days before I was supposed to leave for my flight for Hong Kong and then Hong Kong to China, if I had gotten, a positive test, I wouldn't have been able to leave. And then I would have had to go through the whole process again, which would have been very expensive. So in my mind, I was like, I have one shot to get a negative test and to get to Hong Kong. And I'm very thankful that happened. So that's a whole thing. I mean, that could be a podcast in and of itself, that whole process. But it was similar to what I was saying about my experience with the New Jersey Devils. I was so nervous, and you're walking around, I'm getting my credentials and, all of these things. And then I guess it was about the second full day that I was there, the women's hockey tournament started before opening ceremony. And so I'm like freaking out. It's like Beijing 2022 everywhere, right? Everywhere. And I'm like, I'm at the Olympics. Like what is going on? And then I got to the hockey rink and I was like, oh, okay, I know this. I know what I'm doing. I recognize these people. And so I'm really thankful again for hockey, because I feel like I probably would have been like, this is overwhelming and I'm at the Olympics. But having hockey be kind of that familiar thing for me was very helpful. And then the experience was amazing. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. It's this big international tournament. It's the biggest tournament. It's the biggest sports tournament ever, right? Some people want to say FIFA World Cup, and okay, that's biggest football tournament. This is the biggest tournament of all sports tournaments because there's so many sports going on. There's so many athletes, so many countries. And how something like, of course, I know what the Olympics is. And then I go and I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of a big deal. It was like, oh, man, this is like a big deal. But then going back to what has always been a part of my story and a part of my storytelling is identifying Black women and women of color in the space. And so many Black women made history at these Olympics, including I got to see the first Black woman win an Olympic gold medal in ice hockey. And that, of course, is Sarah Nurse from Hockey Canada. So that was a really special moment. That's probably the first time that I had tears of joy and excitement. I probably cried some anxious tears while I was in Beijing. I don't think I filmed those, but that moment was really special to see Sarah Nurse, someone that I had covered for years. And she had such a great tournament. Oh my gosh. She was coming off of this really gnarly injury. She gets bumped to a different line and is playing a different role with, I don't know, just, Brianne Jenner and someone you might have heard of her. I don't know, Marie-Philippe Poulin. No big deal. Just one of the best hockey players in the world. And she did amazing. So it was such an emotional experience. And I'm not someone that likes to sit in my emotion, but I really had to, which I think was good for me, honestly. I really had to sit in my emotions and be honest with how I was feeling. And I really tapped into my faith a lot, because were it not for my faith, I don't know that I would have ever gotten on that plane. So it was a really great experience. I'm already hoping and planning for, under my rebrand of my company, Black Rosie Media, to be there and hopefully to bring along some other women and other melanated people in sports. So the next 4 years essentially is me building out my media company, working with some partners, hopefully, and getting funding. Because another thing, it was a lot of money. And I fronted a lot of that money. I mean, it came through my company, but it was me writing an article here and then putting almost all of that money right back into the Olympics. So I'm hoping to create a mechanism where over time, not only am I amplifying women and women of color in this space, but that we can create a mechanism where more of us are at these massive tournaments, from the Olympics to World Championships to, Stanley Cup, Final Fours, Frozen Fours. I think that there is a place for all of us. And so that's what I'll be working towards.
That's amazing. That's so nice. And I think that when I saw you starting the campaign for the Olympics, I was so excited, because I've followed you ever since I got into hockey. And I was seeing you going almost felt like I was going to, because you covered it so well. It was so nice. So it was really exciting.
Okay, so we were talking about great players. We talked about the Olympics, the NHL and PHF broadcasts, but I want to know about those who are coming, because you got you were in the Frozen Four. So you could see some talented players, and I want to know do you think the NCAA could become a bigger talent resource for the NHL like it is for the NFL and the NBA? And how was the experience of being there and seeing all this seeing all these players? How was the experience?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because hockey is interesting. It's almost similar to baseball in that the NCAA is not a direct feeder, to your point. I mean, obviously they recruit players that a lot of them do have some NCAA experience, but they're then going through usually some kind of feeder system. So baseball's a lot like that too. Sometimes you can get drafted even in high school, but you don't hit the major leagues until several years later. Similar in hockey, you'll get drafted, but you might not go pro right away. So on the one hand, I think that it kind of already is a feeder. What I would love to see, though, is for hockey to be a little bit more open to then circling back to the NCAA and finding ways for some of those players that play out all 4 years to find their way to the league. I think it's very rare to see undrafted players. It's not that it never happens. I mean, I cover the Seattle Kraken, JT Brown was undrafted and then ended up having an NHL career and is now an NHL broadcaster. But there was so much amazing talent. But the way that we think now in NHL terms, if you're a junior or a senior and you're not already drafted, there's not that many people that think you have a chance. And I saw some amazing talent. The goalie battle in the Michigan-Denver game was amazing. And these are, two players from Sweden, and it was fantastic to see, Eric Petrillo for Michigan. And I was focused on Michigan because Matty Beniers, who's the number 2 overall pick for Seattle, who just made his debut. He played for Michigan, but then getting to see all of the talent that he was playing with, playing against, and realizing that, I think it was 2 of the players that were Hobey Baker finalists for this year were undrafted. So I think that there is a little bit of a connection, but it's on the front end of the NCAA system. So I would like to see NHL teams or even other feeder AHL, ECHL teams, have a little bit more of a mechanism to circle and cycle back to some of those older or upperclassmen, as we say, and get them involved. Because I think if I look at the women's game, the NCAA is absolutely the feeder, more so to the national team, because we're still kind of trying to figure out where women's hockey professionally in the United States and in North America, how that all kind of works itself out. But we also see it's kind of the inverse, right? So you have someone like Alina Mueller, who I think Beijing was her 3rd Olympics, and she's only like a sophomore or something like that in college, because in Europe or other places in the world, the NCAA is where they bring their athletes to get them ready for the international stage. So it's also interesting to see, it was interesting for me to see how things are similar, but also different from what I'm used to, which is the women's side of the game. But overall, it was really exciting. I mentioned that the hockey community is small, and I don't know how this is going to come off, but I'll just say it because it's on my mind. But sometimes I'm a little bit shocked that I'll be at the men's Frozen Four or even at the Olympics, and people will be like, "Oh, wait, Ayala," because again, my name is very popular in, among people of color and communities of color. But if you're not from a community of color, it's a name that's going to stand out. But I guess that's a good thing. And so I would have people say, Ayala, yeah, I know you, or I follow you on Twitter. And so I try not to be someone that needs validation from the outside. That being said, when you work really hard and you just feel like you put your head down and then you look up and people recognize the work that you're doing, I'm not going to lie, that was kind of cool. And so to see people, that have been covering hockey for ESPN for years, I literally had someone, it was Greg Wyshynski. And, there's this young person there and wanted to talk to Greg and wanted to connect with him, and, was just super excited to meet Greg. And then he turns around immediately. He's like, "Hey, you did a great job in Beijing." And I was just like, yeah, it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool for him to go from someone being so excited to get to know him and want to network with him to him then turning around and wanting to validate my work. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. And this year, the Michigan team, I follow Michigan. I fell in love with the university and I just love that team. And they had like Nick Blankenberg, that was their captain. He signed with the Blue Jackets. He was a free agent, and I was so excited because it's so good. And Garrett Van Wy, he signed with an AHL team. I think it's the Comets. And it's like, I noticed like this little shift a little bit. And then Ben Meyer signed with the Avalanche like 2 days ago or yesterday. So those were so cool because there are so many good players in the NCAA, and it's so frustrating that they usually look at the junior leagues a lot more than they look at college. And college hockey is getting better and better. And we have like Owen Power, Matty Beniers, Ken Johnson, Luke Hughes, like the entire top 4 of this year was like from college hockey. So it was really nice to see.
I know, it was super nice to see. And again, just coming from women's sports, whether it's hockey or basketball, I'm so accustomed to them. I mean, literally they have to stay in college, which is a whole nother conversation. I don't like that they have to, like someone somewhere in a room, probably a man, was like, nope, women don't get to leave college early, even though statistically speaking, women are far more likely to finish their degree, even if it's not immediately, but like we're the most educated people in the United States college system. I don't know how it is other places, but I venture to guess it's not that far off. But anyway, an aside, but you know, when you watch women's sports, you're just so accustomed to them staying at least 3 years. And usually that 3 years is probably 4 anyway, just because of injury or things like that. And so, you know, it's the opposite though, when it comes to men's hockey. And so I would have loved to see that Michigan team, you know, like their revenge tour. They come so close. Oh, what a heartbreaking loss. Can you even imagine how stacked that team would be with yet another year of recruits? I'm sad we won't get to see that. But that being said, this young crop in this draft class, I think people are underestimating, quite honestly, the skill that the first round in particular brings. I mean, first rounders, generally speaking, are pretty good, but they've gotten some really great international experience as well, which I always think a lot of people see the NHL as the end all be all. And I think it definitely is when it comes to marketing. But when it comes to the way I like hockey, I think international hockey is the most fun by far.
Yeah. And I was actually talking about this with my boyfriend the other day. I follow the Buffalo Sabres and I cover them. So I followed Owen Power anywhere he went, basically. And I saw some people saying on Twitter that that the expectations needed to be managed because he never played against NHLers. And I was like, he played in the World Championship last year and it was filled with NHLers. So like he kind of already knows what he's doing. Of course, it's hard, but he's played with them. So it's this draft class is amazing. They're so talented. So talented.
Yeah, agreed. So, yeah, I think the future is bright. I think also what was fun to watch Michigan is that their coach was all about them just having fun and, you know, being a little like boastful at times, which is so anti what a lot of people see as hockey culture. But I think this young crop, even I'm forgetting his name right now, which it's escaping me. But well, yes, Mel Pearson, the coach, but there's a draft pick for the Seattle Kraken that was asked, no, that's okay. He was asked, what's like something like, what's a goal of yours coming in? And he was like, well, I'm here to prove that the Seattle Kraken made a good choice in picking me. And I was like, yes, like, let's go, So I think it'll be fun to see. Hopefully they still keep that energy. And then you've got players like Matty Beniers. What a sweetheart. Like he's he's having a lot of fun playing hockey. You can tell he's so, I feel like if I were to use the word sensitive, people would, men would not understand, but he's just so genuine. You know, he wears his heart on his sleeve. He, just cares a lot about the game. And yeah, I think he is sensitive. This means a lot to him. He's thoughtful about his team, and loyalty and stuff like that is important. So it was really fun. It's fun to watch him, but it was also tough to see him lose at the Olympics, and then also to see him lose at the Frozen Four, because he's still a young guy, and like I said, he's really tapped in with his emotions, and so those are always tough. But I think that's good for the game as well. You can play this hard physical game, you can play this beautiful team game, and still, have feelings about it.
And I like just to point out that was so interesting about your story with hockey, that you started in women's hockey and then you like went to the men's hockey. And that was so interesting because it's usually the other way around. I believe it was the other way around for all of us. Like we started following the NHL, and then we went and started seeing the NWHL, and then the PHF coming in the PA. And it's so funny to see like someone coming from the other perspective, like following first women's hockey and then coming to men's hockey. It was so interesting when you said that.
Yeah. And it's something that honestly I was very conscious of, just because even in women's hockey, a lot of people still seem to hold the standard as the NHL. And, sometimes I somewhat jokingly will say like, oh, I'm doing boys hockey stuff today. Cause they always call, regardless, you can be 57 years old and they'll still call you a girl on the ice. And I'm like, I think she's earned the right to be called a woman. But anyway, so it's something I'm conscious of. And I think where I stand now is that, like I said, anytime someone asks me how I got into hockey, my hockey story very much comes through women, but not just women, through Black women and women of color. And that's really important to me. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Blake Bolden. She's another big part of my story, personally and professionally. And I remember saying like, someone's asking me to kind of do this, men's hockey thing. And I don't know if I want to do that, because a lot of people see going to men's hockey as the step up, and then you just never do women's hockey again. And I knew that would never be me. So I was hesitant to come into the men's hockey space, because to me, it just felt like I was then supposed to see women's hockey as less, or to do women's hockey less. And I never wanted to do that. And, Blake encouraged me by saying, you get to choose, don't say no to something before you even get the opportunity. And I think I coupled that with knowing that, again, I'm pretty loyal, and women's hockey is where I cut my teeth, where I got my start. So if anything, being in the men's hockey space can now bring some of those men's hockey people to women's hockey. So that's my new challenge and task is, anytime I talk about men's hockey, I always make references to women's hockey as well.
That's so nice. Yeah. And you were a part of the PHF broadcasting team this year. How important was that for you? Like coming from this background of coming into hockey with women's hockey, that must have been like huge for you.
It was really huge. And, it was one of those things that I don't take it for granted, because I know there's new ownership and new leadership, and you never know if you'll be asked back. And they were working with a new production team for the last 2 seasons. So it's definitely something I'm always excited when I'm asked back. And this was my 6th season on the broadcast, in particular, my 7th season covering hockey overall. So I got to be on a broadcast in my 2nd season covering hockey, like ever. So like, how rare is that? But I'm also the longest tenured broadcaster. There's not a lot of us from those early years that were invited to, we call the games remotely in Florida. So there's not a lot of us from that original crew that were even asked back or able to come back, just because some people are not able to travel with whatever other responsibilities that they have. So I'm very fortunate and very blessed in that way. And it's something that I try to always bring back and call in some of the people that helped pave the path for me, while also challenging all of us that are on the call to think about what the future of the league is, or the future of broadcasting is, and hopefully having fun. And, I think what's exciting is, there's some hockey purists that will still say defensemen, even when they're covering women's games. But, I think that there are also ways to be not only innovative, but also inclusive in language. And that's something that I try to do, including every once in a while, bringing in different cultures and speaking or, mentioning different words in different languages on the broadcast, which goes back to everything that we've been talking about on this show, is that, we already know that we're here. And so when I get emails or messages from people who are just like, oh, thank you so much for, that picante call, because instead of saying spicy, I'll say picante, in Spanish. And those things, they mean a lot to people who have been in this space, but never heard or seen themselves represented. So I try to bring that. And even things like, I'll probably, before we end here, say obrigada. I don't speak Portuguese, but I think it's the least that I can do when you're sharing a space, and you're sharing a space with multiple cultures, to just find a word or two or a phrase or two that you can say to show that you've done your work, and that you're honoring that it's not just my perspective and who I am, that there are other people in other spaces. And also I just like to learn. I feel like you probably have picked that up. I'm a very curious person. So learning new things is always fun for me.
I think that the only thing that we didn't talk about was the Seattle Kraken. Like how did you got to work with them? How it's going?
Yeah, so the Seattle Kraken, I'm doing a Seattle Kraken based show for a company called Locked On Kraken, or excuse me, Locked On Podcast. The show is Locked, but my show is Locked On Kraken, but the company is Locked On, the Locked On Podcast Network. And I started with them actually through women's basketball. They have a show called Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm not one of the hosts on that show any longer, but I was for a really long time. And they tapped me pretty early. I think when I started the basketball show, they were like, hey, do you want to do a hockey show too? And I was like, listen, I don't know anything about boys hockey. And I said, at the time, the Seattle Kraken hadn't even been named, but I had done some freelance writing for NHL Seattle. And I said to them, well, I don't think I'm quite ready to cover an NHL team. And they listed some of the teams that they had spaces available. And it just wasn't any of the teams that I was familiar with. Like I said, the Rangers, because they're in New York, but the Devils in particular, I knew them because of the partnership with the Riveters. And so I said, well, when you're ready to do the Seattle Kraken show, like I've written for the NHL team, NHL Seattle. And, I'm a little bit more tapped in on as to what they're doing, have some connections there. I'd be open to doing that show. And so I guess they thought that was a good idea. So I'm the host of Locked On Kraken. It's been a lot of fun. The team's not doing so great. They did not have a Las Vegas first year. They did not have a Golden Knights first year. But, I'm fans of some teams that have not been the greatest. I'm a New York Mets fan in baseball, so I'm kind of used to that. But again, I really know the Seattle culture, the Seattle Kraken culture that's been building. And I think that's really exciting. The fan base is super exciting. And there's been some, actually, just before we hopped on, I was talking to Zoe Hickel, who's a former women's hockey player and coached with the OSU women's hockey team that just won the national championship and is now going to be working for the Seattle Kraken and their AHL affiliate, the Coachella Valley Firebirds. So I love with a new team that there's also new people and personnel. So they're infusing new voices. I mean, on today's show, I have a piece where I'm talking to Everett Fitzhugh, who became the first Black man to do play-by-play in the NHL, first as the radio voice and then on network TV for the Seattle Kraken. I had him on the show and we talked about the Black Hockey History Museum and being a broadcaster. So I talked to Zoe Hickel and her episode will run sometime next week. So I think it's been fun. History and incorporating culture is so important to me. And when you have a new team, there's a lot of that's being established. And Seattle actually has a really cool hockey history, including women's hockey, their first ever team to win a Stanley Cup. The owners of that team actually created a women's hockey team for essentially the wives of his hockey players. And so women have been playing hockey in the Pacific Northwest since the beginning of the 1900s. And so stuff like that is really cool. And I have to give a stick tap, as we say in hockey, to Women's Pro Hockey Seattle. They're the people that put me on to that history, and we talked about it on the podcast. So I think it's been fun. It's a brand new show. It's a brand new team, and the company has been very open and receptive to my vision of hockey. And so I'll let you all know right now, open invitation if you ever want to come on Locked On Kraken to talk college hockey, or again, we're not going to be in the playoffs, so I'll have plenty of open airspace to invite guests, but I would love to invite y'all to join, but it's been a blast. Yeah, it's been so much fun.
Yeah, we absolutely love that.
I'm going to speak only say about Yanni God.
Yes, Yanni. Oh, he's so much
amazing.
Fun. He's so fun.
I think the only one of us that the pick in the expansion draft is not still with the Kraken. It is me, right? Because I'm a Washington Capitals fan. So when we traded back to the tech, I was like, oh my God, how did that happen? But seeing the Seattle Kraken being born and etc. is very cool, because I am new to hockey too. So I didn't get the Las Vegas Golden Knights, the beginning of them. I saw the Stanley Cup that they lost to my team. That was great for me. But so it's great to see the way that the Kraken are doing their thing, like the culture that they're building. So it's very nice to see.
Yeah, it's been super exciting.
Okay.
It's a shame that they're not going to the playoffs, because
I know. I call them on the podcast, I mention it a lot, but I'm like, they're basically like a teenager, like at that teenage age, you kind of know what to do, you know what's expected of you, but you can't always do it. And it's not that you're not trying, but you're just not, your brain isn't fully developed and your discipline isn't fully developed. And so I kind of call the Seattle Kraken the teenagers. So I'm hoping by next year they'll be in their early 20s.
People were with the Las Vegas Golden Knights experience in mind, right? So the Golden Knights were the outlier. Like, it's very hard for a first year expansion team to the final. So I think the future is bright to
I think so. I'm really excited what Seattle's going to do. They have a lot of draft picks, and I think they're going to make a lot of moves in free agency, because one thing Ron Francis, the general manager, has talked a lot about is that another thing that was different is that the expansion draft rules were different for the Vegas Golden Knights to the Seattle Kraken. And, there were several years between Vegas and the last expansion team. and only a handful of years between Vegas and the Seattle Kraken. So GMs got hip. If you listen to Ron Francis, it sounds like they made it a little tougher for him. So I'm very excited to see what they'll do in the off season, in free agency, and moving around some of those picks, I think, to get some dollars back in the bank, and or to kind of use it as equity, as leverage to get some more help. I would like to see a little bit more defensive help, but which is so interesting because I think when you looked at the draft, you thought they were going to be really solid defensively, but I think they need a little more physicality. Big Rig is getting it done, but we need a few more guys that are going to throw their weight around. They're not a very big team. So I think they need a little bit more support there. Get a little nasty sometimes on the ice.
and one thing that I heard a player say, like Bo Byram from the Avalanche, he spent like a year out of the game because of a concussion, and he was like, the hardest part to get back to is a defensive game, and he's a defenseman. So I think that they just need a little bit more time to adjust there, because it's the hardest part of the game in my point of view.
Yes, it is very technical. It's the most technical part of the game. And a lot of it is anticipation. So you really have to, that's why they say, minding the gap or closing gaps. And you really have to be confident in yourself, confident in your teammates, and also be able to anticipate what's coming. And that's a lot to do when you're playing with new people in front of you. You're playing with a new goaltender. So I think you're right. I think this first year, I think they still can do better with the consistency, even with what they have, but there's definitely glimmers of hope, and it's going to take a little more time, but I'm really excited. I hope we keep Ryan Donato. He's one of my faves. Matty Beniers looked really good in his debut, actually primary assist on a Ryan Donato goal. So, I mean, Jared McCann is someone that has kind of bounced around, but has found his way and is one of the leading scorers and an effective player with the Seattle Kraken. So they have really good pieces. And I get the sense that some of those guys that have been on the fringe or have been kind of pawns in other big deals, they are finding their home or hoping to find their home in Seattle. So I hope some of those guys stick around.
Yeah, that's true. It's so bad for them to move around.
I know. And then we got Matty Beniers, and if Ron Francis has anything to do with it, Matty Beniers will be around for a while. So I think that's a really good piece for them to have as they're building a young team.
Yeah, totally. He's amazing. If you're listening, you're amazing. Okay, so I think that we can wrap it up now. Like an hour of show already. Like it's so good. I think that we could continue for like hours, but I know you have a tight agenda, and us too. So thank you so much, Erica, for being here with us, for taking the time to talk with us. It's so amazing. It's like we're all a little bit starstruck. We're a little bit less now, but at the beginning we're all nervous, so nervous.
Oh no, well, thank you. I mean, again, I've seen the work that you all are doing from a distance, and I'm so thrilled to be on the show, to get to know you. Don't forget, follow up. I'll get those postcards to you, and have to get you on Locked On Kraken. And as I already mentioned, I have my little Portuguese. Obrigada. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this was our little show with Erica. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and watching, because it's going to be on YouTube as well. And that's it, guys. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.